Welcome to the training videos of the poultry practice. My name is Darren Petty and I will be doing a brief presentation on biosecurity for broiler farms. So the aim of this presentation is to introduce simple biosecurity concepts that can be applied on a broiler farm. Not all farms are equal. Farms have certain risks attached to them, often based on where they are situated. Things that tend to cause increased risk are proximity to main roads, closeness to dams and waterways, situated on flyovers of wild birds or migration routes, and close to other farms. All of these things have a higher level of risk attached to them and therefore would need to have more biosecurity rather than less. At its simplest, biosecurity can be summed up as a no germs in, no germs out policy. This can apply to the whole farm, so preventing the farm from being infected by other farms. It can also apply to different sites on the farm, preventing one site on a farm from infecting other sites, and it can even apply to poultry sheds, keeping a disease in a particular poultry shed and stopping it from spreading to other poultry sheds. The idea is really to keep the disease out of the farm or the site or the shed. Broiler farms can get infected in a number of ways. By far the most common way in which broiler farms get infected is from the people who work on these farms. And these can be both the workers and it can also be the owners or managers of the farms that infect them. Equipment taken onto a farm, especially where the equipment is shared between a couple of farms, is a common method in which infection is carried. Vehicles are notoriously difficult to clean, especially where the load space is contaminated. Think of a manure truck. These can carry infections in easily. Airborne infections, we all know that many of the respiratory diseases like Newcastle, avian influenza will spread on the air between sheds and between sites on farms. So a certain distance between farms and between sites is mandatory. If the chicks coming onto the farm are infected with the disease, they obviously will bring the disease in. Water can carry coliforms, E. coli and other salmonella, and feed can become infected because of contamination from rodents and wild birds, because of airborne infections. All of these things can cause problems for the broiler farmer. By far the biggest biosecurity risk on your farm is posed by the people that work on it. These people keep chickens at their dwelling places. They eat chicken that comes from other farms that they kill. They eat eggs that come from other farms. They walk through feces of wild birds and walk it into your sheds. They move from one shed to another, spreading a disease. They use infected cell phones, boots that can become contaminated. All of these things are of grave concern and need to be controlled. The best control that you as a manager can do is lead by example. People are impressed more by actions than they are by words. So if you expect your people to shower or to change boots or to change overalls, then it's best that you do it as well. So the best way to conceive of what kind of controls you need for your people is to think about a person who's been on an infected farm, a farm infected with avian influenza, and is about to come onto your farm. How sure are you that that person will not cause an outbreak of avian influenza on your farm? And so we talk about good access control. Can that person just merely stroll onto your farm and into your site without any access control whatsoever? Do you have access control, but you don't ask people where they've been? You merely allow them to come into the site without actually checking that they haven't been on a poultry farm, that they don't keep poultry themselves? How sure are you that once they're on the site with those infected shoes, but they don't drop a little bit of manure which is picked up by one of your workers and taken straight into a shed. So these basic things, like good access control, like the requirement to change boots and clothes for a site, like the double boot system, like not keeping poultry at home, the requirement for that, and checking, like not allowing poultry workers to eat and drink in the house, where the risk of them spreading salmonella is that much higher if the food is infected. All of these things should be in place. And as we've said before, each farm has a different risk, and where the risk is very high, showering is recommended. So it's important to understand that a disease, a bacteria, a virus can stick on people's hair, can stick on their skin, can stick on their clothes, and be passively walked into the house and cause disease outbreaks. And therefore, trying to get rid of this risk is very, very important. Trucks are notoriously difficult to clean. They're big, they're bulky, and the dirt sits on the top where you can't see it. Feed trucks ideally should be cleaned at the feed mill, and the process of verification of the cleaning is important. Was the feed truck cleaned directly before it came onto your farm? Or was the feed truck cleaned early in the morning and then it went to a number of other farms before it arrived on your farm, in which case the cleaning is completely useless. The parts of the feed truck that need attention are the areas around the lid where wet feed accumulates and often grows fungus. The auger itself can contain residual feed which should be released prior to the exit of the feed truck off the farm. The sock on the end of the auger which brushes against the bin can pick up bird feces and should be cleaned after every delivery. The cabin itself, where the driver and his assistant sits, can become extremely dirty. Drivers should be issued with protective clothing and booties if they are going to climb out the cab, or they should be allowed to shower in. Ideally, the feed truck should not enter the site, but that can be quite difficult. Abattoir trucks usually only enter the site once the site is an open site, and therefore they don't get the attention they deserve. Severely contaminated load spaces and crates can drop manure from other farms onto your farm in the grass in the area outside, and it can be quite difficult to clean those areas up. So although the whole farm will be cleaned after the catching team are finished, sometimes that contamination can miss being cleaned, and so it's better to avoid it altogether by having clean abattoir trucks and crates, and a catching team that is not moving from one site to the other without some kind of downtime. The trucks that remove litter often move from farm to farm and are owned by farmers who have little interest in keeping the load space or the trailer clean. It's therefore important that you, as the broiler farmer, disinfect that load space and make sure that it's clean before it comes onto your farm. Another point about cleaning vehicles is where you site the disinfection station. If that water that you're using to clean a vehicle moves directly onto your site and often close to the broiler shed, it may carry a contamination onto site, and therefore it's important that the water drains away from the site and not towards the site. Feed ingredients are regularly contaminated with bacteria, including salmonella and mycotoxins, but also avian influenza, Newcastle, and other viruses. So it's important that feed ingredients are tested at the feed mill and preventative action taken when a particular batch is found to be contaminated. Fortunately, the high temperatures that are used during pelleting will kill a lot of bacteria and viruses, and are quite effective, therefore, in producing a feed that's got relatively low amounts of contamination. Mycotoxins, however, are another story, and effective mycotoxin binders need to be used in feed if the feed is found to be contaminated with mycotoxins. Feed that is improperly stored on the farm, however, can also result in further contamination with any disease that's wind-borne. Wet feed can grow fungus. Open feed bins can result in rodents and birds being trapped in them, and this can all transmit the disease to the birds. Water is a very important nutrient, and contaminated water will result in poor growth rates in birds, as well as continual infections. So water should not be sourced from dams and rivers where the rates of contamination are high, and it's very difficult to ensure effective disinfection. Even water from boreholes may need to be treated because borehole water can become contaminated with high levels of bacteria, including E. coli, Salmonella, and others. Effective treatment of water is quite difficult to achieve. It's important to pay attention not only to the level of chlorination, if that's your chosen method of disinfection, but also the pH of the water, since the two are linked together. The water can be contaminated at any point. So water can be treated at source and then become contaminated by dirty pipes, by biofilms within the nipples and pipes in the house. And this really is important to check. Water needs to be tested at least once a quarter for bacteria. Wild birds and rodents are attracted to poultry sites as there's often spilled feed, high grass, and water puddles. These should be avoided on a site. In addition, in the case of wild birds, there are a number of things that can be done that can prove to be effective, especially in the short term, in getting rid of the birds on a site. So the first thing to avoid is siting the farm near to a dam or in the middle of, for instance, a maize field where there's an abundant source of feed for both the rodents and the wild birds. The other thing that can be done on a site is the use of lasers, especially at night when the ducks are active. The use of flapping shiny paper that tends to confuse birds, and the use of predator models on roofs that also can be quite effective in preventing birds from coming onto site. In the case of rodents, the most important thing to do is to avoid having large amounts of feed available. This, of course, can be quite difficult since the feed is present in the house in large numbers for the poultry. So there should really be an effective rodent control program in place, and this needs to be monitored at least once a week to prevent rodents from becoming an issue on a farm. Other animals like cattle and sheep and even pets all have their own risks in terms of what diseases they can transmit, and they should be kept off poultry sites to prevent diseases from becoming endemic, and these can especially be things, the foodborne diseases. How to clean a broiler site is a presentation on its own, but it's really important in terms of biosecurity just to mention the cleaning of the site in order to prevent disease from transmitting from one set of birds to the other. The other problem is that disease builds up on a site and can affect materially the growth of broilers. So it's really important to make sure that your site has a proper downtime for dropping the bacterial load and that the cleaning is effective in the sheds and includes the rest of the site, the changing rooms and the offices. as these can form reservoirs of contamination which will simply affect the site again. Cleaning will be dealt with another section. Good biosecurity is your only defense against avian influenza and other diseases. Good biosecurity is a matter of repetition and practice. The more you do it, the better it will be. If you make exceptions to your biosecurity rules for certain people, for certain animals, you will find that your biosecurity overall will have huge holes in it. It will give you a false sense of security, and in the long term will actually contribute to diseases entering your farm. I urge you to take note of these biosecurity protocols and put them into place. Thank you for listening.